Welcome to Weekly Talkback. I'm Kevin Beers.
And I'm David Whitten.
And this is the show where we get to talk to Pastor Dave about his message from the previous Sunday's worship service. The previous one on this one is September 10th, 2023. And the title was from actually a quote from Bill Parcells, who said, "The best ability is availability." And that's what we're going to dig into today. A lot of what I got from your message was really answering the call of God. Okay, so when God calls, we answer. And you went through a bunch of different prophets, essentially, who, well, what you said was made excuses or complained or,
or ran the opposite direction.
Yes. So I wanted to get into that a little bit because you said your own call was, like, you got to be kidding me.
Right.
Okay. So, and this made me think about a couple of different things. Human nature. Again, I always go back to human nature. First of all, Moses. I'm not sure it was an excuse as much as it was an identification of his own shortcomings.
Yeah.
Because he basically said, like, I stutter, I'm not a good speaker. And then God's like, okay, then we'll send Aaron with you. I mean, there was a way to make up for it. Is that really an excuse, or is it identifying?
Yeah, well, I
guess we can go both ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, God sees potential where we don't. And so Moses had the speech impediment. And, serious consideration, it was like, hey, God, are you sure you want me? Because I'm not the best, I'm not the best speaker there is. We don't see God calling these people. And I think I use Moses and Gideon, Jeremiah, and Jonah along with Isaiah.
Sure.
We don't see God sitting down and saying, I recognize your leadership skills. And I recognize your weaknesses, but I recognize your leadership skills, and so therefore I want to call you. He just calls them and figures out, I guess God just basically figures out, I'll take care of the leadership aspects to your call. Okay. You just answer the call.
Okay. Yeah, because I was thought about Jonah specifically. So Jonah, he does go the opposite direction. But
gotta love him.
But God's like, hey, I want you to do this. But his reasoning was, if I show up and say I'm a prophet and I'm wrong, they're going to stone me, because that was the punishment for a false prophet. So he's like, I don't, how do I know? What are my assurances that I'm not going to get killed in the process? I mean, that can be looked at as an excuse, or, like for me, as someone who's very logical about things, I'd be asking those same questions.
Right.
I don't know that I would have run off and but that was one of those things, like, well, God's like, I will follow you to the ends of the earth until you do this thing. I mean, what exactly what is that God's doing there?
Yeah, well, it's funny because my own call to the ministry took place when I was around 40, and my question to God has always been, was he calling me the whole time and I just wasn't paying attention? Or like Jonah, I was running to the far corners of the globe? Or had God not call until he thought that I was prepared to respond to the call? Or he knew that as a 21-year-old or a 25-year-old, I wouldn't make a good minister. But maybe at age 40, well, there's some potential now with him. I don't know.
Okay, yeah, because I thought about my own call, because I was licensed in the ministry years ago, and I realized over time, just to clarify all that, my call to ministry was really more of a call for me to recognize my depression and to work through that.
Okay.
Because my call put me in a position where there were 200 members in the congregation, every one of them pulling on me in a different direction, where I finally broke down because I couldn't manage it.
Oh.
And through that process, I was able to find healing, and we talked about that with the anointing. All that happened because of the call. Now, when the call came, I was kind of like you. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I'm just starting my career out, because this was in my, I think I had kids, so it would have been like I was around 30 or so.
Okay.
And it was more of a, it doesn't make sense because I make enough money to support this family, and I'm looking at the guidelines for someone with zero education, and pastors don't get paid much if they don't have an education.
Uh-huh.
Like, how does this even make sense? And it took a while to work through that. Like, okay, I got to trust God on this one. And then I was ready. But I had to work through this process of, how does this even make sense? Because it didn't make sense. If I become a pastor, I'm going to lose my house. Or, like, none of this adds up. And if you know me, the numbers have to line up.
Oh yeah, well, I don't know. I mean, I think the attempt yesterday in my sermon was to look at the complete willingness on the part of Isaiah to say, here I am, send me. I don't know what you're looking for. I don't even know what you want me to do or say or anything. But if you're calling me, I accept. I'm here. Send me. And I think that was what I was trying to differentiate between the earlier ones that I had recognized as the reluctant prophets, those who really complained about or made excuses that they didn't have the skills necessary, or like Jonah, just fled out of fear, or obstinance. I'm not sure for sure which.
Now because I look back at my call, so our church at that time, this was a church in Pennsylvania, they went through a process of discerning who in the congregation should be called, and then I was not one of them. But through that process, and it was about 6 months after that process had ended, where I felt the call, and then I went back and said, hey, this is what I'm feeling, this is what is on my mind, and that sort of thing. But I think if someone had come to me and said, hey, we discern that you're being called, I probably would have said no. But because I came to it on my own. So now, and you point this out with Isaiah was not directly told, I'm calling you. It was like God's like, hey, I got to send somebody. Who's that going to be?
Yeah.
And Isaiah's like, oh, maybe that's me.
Yeah.
I kind of look at it that way.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it.
Because the others, God's like, hey, I'm calling you to do this thing. And they're like, are you really? Really?
Yeah.
I mean, how did your call come? Did that come through a process of the church, or?
Well, it eventually has to, because the Church of the Brethren's polity is that the congregation, the local congregation, sees the leadership skills or the potentiality in someone, and then calls that person. But I believe, in my own case, I think it was kind of a mutual thing. I think that they saw some leadership abilities, and I also was feeling the call myself, and I think I shared that with the church. That I think God has called me to this. Like I said yesterday morning, after serious thought and prayer, I initially thought, and when I told everyone else, everyone's response was pretty much the same as mine. You got to be kidding me.
That wasn't what I experienced. What I experienced was everybody was kind of like, yeah, that makes sense. It was, I got a completely different reaction.
Well, I think people who knew me and knew some of the turbulent years in my own life were the ones that were saying, like my parents and my sisters, it was like, oh, come on, even a ministry? That's absurd. But I think the congregation that I was working in at the time didn't know the history. Probably a good thing. Didn't know the history. That but it's just like the Apostle Paul, who he was called in a very dramatic way and changed his lifestyle from a lifestyle that was really anti-Christ.
Yeah, because I've noticed a lot of people who converted later after a horrible lifestyle just
Are you calling mine a horrible lifestyle?
No, but I'm thinking of people that have come out of prison who become pastors.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
People that their entire bodies are tattooed, just the lifestyle they were living.
Absolutely.
And then they do this entire turnaround because God called them and saved them.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden they're different people, but they use what they grew up in
Yeah.
as a tool
Yeah.
to help others.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You know, I do believe I was called to ministry. It was not pastoral ministry in particular, but my ministry is far different. But I use, it was to recognize the depression and go through the healing process. Well, now I help other people who deal with depression and mental illness and things like that. It's very hard. It's a very hard place to be because I find it tends to. It's very easy for me to get drugged back into the depression when other people are feeling depressed.
Yeah.
So it's a hard place to be, but at the same time, I see the effectiveness of what's going on there.
And you sense a call to that.
Yes,
Yeah.
I do. As a matter of fact, I was preaching one day. I don't know who the pastor was at the time, but somebody was out of the pulpit. And I preached, and that morning when I got up, I was brushing my teeth, and I just felt like I have to talk about my depression today. I didn't know why, but I did. And there were like 6 people on the way out the door, because we stood at the door and greeted people as they left. 6 people stopped and said, "I'm dealing with the same thing." And it was, I just felt I had to talk about it.
Yeah.
And I did. And then there were 6 people I could kind of just connect with.
Yeah.
I didn't necessarily counsel them or anything like that.
No, but just the fact that they were able to come out and say that they struggle with those, those illnesses that we pretty much look down upon. What's the word I'm looking for?
There's a stigma.
Stigma.
There's a stigma attached to it.
Yeah.
And I think that's this whole calling idea. And honestly, I think if God is calling you to something, there's no getting away.
Yeah.
You're just not going to get away from that.
Yeah.
I think you can say no, but I think God's kind of like a cat that's hungry. You cannot do anything until you finally answer that.
Yeah, Anne Lamott, who is one of my favorite authors, talks about Jesus as kind of like being a cat. Follow her home, sneak through the window, get into the house, rub against her leg, and then Anne Lamott finally looks down at the cat, which is essentially Jesus. I mean, this is all imagination. Says, "Okay, you win. You can stay."
Exactly. Yes. Well, I think Jonah is the more dramatic story. Of like, once you're called, you're called. Like you're going to do it, whatever it might be. Now, and the thing is, and I really relate to Jonah in so many different ways. One, he finally does get to Nineveh. He finally does preach. They repent, and God doesn't do what He said He was going to do, which was destroy them. And Jonah's sitting up on the hill, like,
he gets angry
seriously,
about it.
I did what you said. Now do it. Do what said you. But it was the fact that I don't relate to the fact that I get upset if someone doesn't get destroyed, but the fact that I did everything and this is not the turnout that I was promised, but the turnout was better. When you finally come to realize that. The story of Jonah doesn't show us that he ever came around to that, but I'm assuming he did because I relate so well to him, and I'm thinking I would have come around to it. He would have come around to it.
And well, of course, he had several things that were causing him to feel the way he did. I mean, Nineveh was a hated enemy, and so he didn't want God to change, his attempt to destroy Nineveh, and he didn't like the idea that God kind of changed God's mind a little bit. I mean, God said, "I'm going to." And then they repented, and he changed his mind and said, "Okay, I'm not going to."
Right.
And that ticked Jonah off.
Okay. I just want to throw one last thing in there.
Yeah, please do.
Mary, when she was told that she was going to give birth to Jesus, she very willingly said, "Okay, I'm God's servant."
Yes.
So That was the second instance of.
Yeah, we
just
could have.
automatically.
I could have used her as reflecting the same kind of innocent, all willing approach that Isaiah gave to God when God called.
Yeah, I think though. We could get a lot more play out of Isaiah. We got the songs to go with it, and we. Anyway, okay. I'm just jumping. I'm all about utility, so.
And he's rattling on at this point in time, so maybe we'll try to curb him a little
this
bit.
is it here. So that's where we're going to end it today. And actually, we want to hear your story. Have you been called to anything in particular by God? And what exactly was it? How did you respond? Things like that. Just tell us your story down in the comments. If you did not hear the entire message, that will be linked in the description. You can go listen to it, come back here, listen to this again. And I think that's it for us. So we'll see you next week.
Yeah, be blessed.